Good afternoon. My name is Bryan McKernan. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Consortiq. Consortiq is a global training, consultancy, and service company. We're based out of Annapolis, Maryland, and London Heathrow and Southampton. Put simply, we help organizations scale the use of drones within their organization. I've been with Consortiq just over 3 years. Prior to that, I was a Marine Corps pilot, primarily flying helicopters and also flying fixed-wing aircraft with a strong background in aviation operations and safety investigations and mishaps. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Bryce Allcorn, who is our principal consultant. Bryce is based out of the United Kingdom, and I'm gonna hand it over to him for a little introduction. Good afternoon or evening, Bryce, to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, or as you say, evening for me. Thank you for joining us. I'm based in Farnborough in Hampshire, home of aviation in the UK. My role within the company is as principal consultant and head of global operations. So I'm responsible for any of our consultancy projects and any of the deployments of our teams, any of our training and the operational side of the business.
Excellent. Thanks, Bryce. And I'd also like to start out, and I'm remiss for not starting with this, but thanks to the Energy Drone Coalition, Krishna and Sean for inviting us. This is our 4th year participating in this event, and although we're sad that we can't be in Houston to join everybody and network with everybody, it's such a fantastic event. Bryce and I are honored and humbled to be able to get out and present to you virtually from our homes. Clearly we all have different backgrounds, but ultimately we're excited to get out and present. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we're gonna speak a little bit about what we're here for today. So today, what we're looking for is scaling up UAVs to increase safety, efficiency, and profitability in critical infrastructure and environments. So this is what we're going to speak about today. We're going to talk about the pillars of success, what we do at Consortiq, and then we'll field it and leave it open for questions for you all and try to provide you with some valuable information. Bryce, over to you.
Thanks, Brian. So when we look at implementing our drone programs, we kind of cover 6 core elements. We start off with looking at the leadership and the way the company that we're working runs, try and get that buy-in and try and get that understanding of the ethos behind the company. We design the program at a corporate level. We look at the equipment and the various things that are required there, move into training, what we call internal systems, and then the review process, as you'll see as we go through the next few slides. So the first point we start with is leadership, and this can never be underestimated. A successful program within any organization and any sort of program needs to have a defined and coherent leadership. That leadership is there to support whatever the program is, whatever needs to be incorporated, and whatever needs to be developed. So what do we mean by the leadership? Well, we need some form of corporate governance. We need some way where the leadership, the director level of the company are shown as approving and promoting the program, supporting an agreed budget and understanding that impact, especially when things like goalposts are moving. And if we look in the environment we're in right now, it's a really key point, because you can set up a program, started a drone program 6 months ago, then look where things are now, where your team can't travel, or however the lockdown has impacted you. How does that impact your budgets? And then understand ongoing that impact if you move those goalposts. Working with stakeholders, so understand who your stakeholders are, really getting into the details of your stakeholder analysis. Site management, so what we mean by that is supporting your drone team for the different sites. So from a corporate level, then when you've got individual sites around the country, around the world, how do you manage that so the drone program can get the appropriate amount of support across the board that's led by leadership? And then supporting the purpose of the program, so the program deliverables. What are you trying to achieve, and how can the leadership ensure that happens? Most programs that fail because the leadership team did not fully support the program. And using a cunning photograph there, a successful UAS program is a long road.
So I just kind of wanted to jump in here, Bryce, if that's okay too, and put my spin on it. One of the biggest the biggest hurdles that we see when we deal with companies. Again, I'm Chief Revenue Officer, so I'm in charge of all sales, business development, marketing for Consortiq. So really the first one, or the first point of contact with folks that are looking to solve some problems and do that with drones, is leadership is such an important part, because when you come forward, you being an internal champion in a company, you've got to prove that internal business case. Why are you even going to use drones? You know, does it make sense? What value will it bring to your organization? Because leadership's not going to buy off on it unless, in my mind, you can really prove two things. One, you can improve safety, and when I say safety, take the tower industry, using drones to do a pre-site survey climb. Again, if you can prevent someone from going vertical multiple times, their chances of falling and getting hurt, worse off, dying, they decrease tenfold. So being able to show the value in human life by preventing people from getting hurt, having medical bills, things of that nature, it's hugely important. And then, of course, the almighty dollar. Everybody understands that, right? So if you can improve your ROI, decrease your time on station by using a drone, and then also decrease the amount of money you're paying to grab whatever those images are or that capture of that site, it's definitely going to resonate with leadership. And these are just some of the things that you really need to sell. And in order to do that, in my opinion, you need an internal champion. You need someone that's going to advocate for that business case. You're going to have someone who's going to have to go out and find that funding as it relates to the budget. Who's going to approve the program? Who in the leadership team actually decides that? And of course, what's your timeline lined up with it? We just had a call today when we were talking about budget and how people's budgets are, constrained right now because of COVID-19. Sometimes people, they don't really know what drones can do or help in their day-to-day operation, and therefore they haven't budgeted for it. So sometimes we look at sales cycles, it can take us anywhere between 12 to 24 months before we actually do something with the company properly, just because of that. So two things that are hugely important.
So yeah, thank you, Bryan. As we move on from what the leadership's roles are, we move into the corporate program. And we start off with, we're talking about a corporate-led program. So this is where you've got we talked earlier, they've got the main, your corporation, you've got your sites around the country or around the world, wherever they might be, and how you're trying to make sure it's centrally run. Often you see, so we go into sites or into organizations where they want to introduce a corporate program, and that's because multiple sites have been doing their own thing. And they've had multiple accidents. They've had run-ins with the FAA. They've had run-ins with law enforcement. They've had accidents, all sorts of issues with them. So the corporation's sitting there and saying, right, we need to manage this. We need to bring this in. We don't want to stop it because the good work that we're getting, the positives, the efficiencies that are being seen, we want to expand that, and we want to expand it across the organization. So they need to run, as we say here, a safe, efficient, and effective UAS program. It needs to be corporate-led. And we start off with looking at the purpose and use case. Why are we even doing this? What is being done now without using UAS, without using unmanned air vehicles? What is being done right now? And do we need to improve on that? So Bryan mentioned earlier about safety. That is one reason. If we can put people out of harm's way by putting them into a safer environment or not putting them in that environment at all, then that is a use case in its own. Budget is really, really key. Unmanned technology is expensive. It's always developing. The equipment that we use, so the equipment that's behind me, not the Lego, has got a limited shelf life. So, how long can you use that for before you have to replace it? And then we start talking about stakeholders. And from a corporate program, the stakeholders are really key. I've put a couple in here that we need to explore a bit further, but the health and safety department, there'll be policies and procedures in place. There will be ways of working within the organization, and the drone program, or the unmanned air vehicle program, needs to be brought into that health and safety banner so that everything that's being done meets the requirements on site. And then we need to talk about IT. So how are we going to manage the data transition, the transfer of data? There's be a lot of it. Firmware updates, access to the server systems, access to Wi-Fi. What about if you've got data that's is confidential? As with a lot of your organisations, are going to have infrastructure that can't be put out there for everyone to see. So how are you going to manage that in a cloud-based environment when you're talking about point clouds and 3D modeling? We talk about legal requirements. We consider how we manage that. And just looking at things like insurance. I think, Brian, you're going to talk about legal in a moment. But then we also talk about the site management, so supporting the UAS team. And one of the biggest issues we find, and we'll explore this a little bit further, but is how sites manage, how the sites are supporting the team in terms of the operators are going to need training. They're going to need training time. They're going to need somewhere to store the equipment, maintain the equipment, all of that type of thing. So how, from a corporate level, can we make sure that the site management allow that to happen and recognize that it's a key part of the individual's roles? We'll talk about training and how that's incorporated in a corporate program, the equipment, and then the ongoing roadmap. And Brian mentioned this, I alluded to this earlier, that we have a dedicated accountable person or a team. It's a key requirement to implementing the program. If you don't have if you don't have that in place with someone who's accountable, someone that's responsible, and someone that's driving it forward, again, it's not going to succeed.
So I'm going to kind of work backwards from Bryce's slide, picking up on where he just left off with that accountable person. Again, from a sales perspective and business development, one of the things that we see quite often is the folks or the person, that stakeholder, accountable person that's charged with leading and investigating, how to build a drone program. It's always their second or third job, and that becomes a problem. It really does, because it doesn't get the attention that it probably needs or warrants unless they completely outsource. They build out what their requirement is and outsource that to a company to be able to do that. And that's not a bad idea either. But ultimately, you really need someone that's gonna run with this and be the advocate to leadership, because ultimately at the corporate level, it takes that corporate buy-in to ensure that there's parity among the different business units or companies within the larger organization. And I'll tell you, from our perspective, having been in this world for the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen companies that do adopt similar technology, similar processes, similar roadmaps, and implement it and reinforce it and make sure that it's adhered to. And I see others that they don't have parity at all among the team, and they're not interested in it at all, because they're doing different things and they're different missions. However, I truly believe that core, by having the corporate structure, and again, it could be a 50,000 foot view, processes, procedures, and then you get more granular the further down the business unit or the company that you get. And again, it doesn't just include that advocate. The health and safety people, they're hugely important, because they're really the ones that when things go south, people are going to turn and look at them and see what safety programs were implemented, what procedures, what processes. No one cares about safety until there's a mishap. And then when there's a mishap, everybody points the finger at that guy. I've got experience in that, having served, at 2 different echelons for safety investigations and, director of safety and standardization in the Marine Corps. And it's a really uncomfortable position, because you're the guy that's always screaming in the background and yelling behind the glass, and no one really cares until a plane crashes. And then all of a sudden, everyone's in a panic and they're running to you, and you're literally, you just put your pajamas on, you're ready to go to bed. And now you're putting back your flight suit on, you're grabbing your go kit, and you're heading back out to the flight line. And it's bringing back a memory from being in the Philippines, where that happened to me at 9:45 at night. I got the call and I had to go. And everybody wants to know what happened and what your information is. 2 points. We live in a very litigious environment in the business world. So legal is hugely important. You want to make sure that you've got your processes airtight. So when you do go into a courtroom, God forbid you have to, and explain how you developed your program, you did it correctly. And then second is, if it bleeds, it leads. We see in this environment, everything is at our hands within 5 seconds. Whether it's CNN, Fox News, the media grabs things immediately because everyone's got a cell phone and everyone's filming that. So you want to make sure that you're doing things correctly. So when you do have to get in front of the cameras, or you do have to answer for what you've done from a corporate level, having that parity and an overall coherent message, coherent program from a corporate level, it just makes sense. It really does. So that's all I got for that one, Bryce.
Carry on, Brian.
Thanks. Next slide.
Yes, please.
You got it.
So this feels a little bit out of order. Why are we talking about equipment before we start talking about training? And what we're trying to do at this point is understand the use case further. So, you know, what are you going to try and do? Clearly define the objectives, the data requirements, etc., before even considering purchasing equipment. This will move on to training in a minute. But if you don't understand what equipment you need and what you're trying to achieve, it's going to be impossible to set your training program and your various other requirements, put them in place. So your team or your individual that's going to be responsible for driving the program, they need to start understanding what drones or our UAS can do, what type of equipment is going to be needed, what's the objective. So are they going to need a single sensor fitted drone, both what I mean a Paranathi, a Skydio, DJI, Mavic Dual Enterprise, something along those lines. So there's a single fitted sensor on there. Some of those have got dual sensors, obviously, but what I mean by that is one that you don't take off and swap over. Do we need multi-rotor? Do we need to be able to fit multiple sensors on there? Are we going to do something where we need to use fixed wing? So we're going to have large areas we're going to be mapping, for example. Do we need something that's got a single battery or multiple batteries? And then the associated issues that go along with having that number of batteries, how much they cost, etc. We start talking about sensors. So again, what are we trying to achieve? Do we just need to video or take photographs of normal red, green, blue, or do we need to start moving down the route of thermal? Do we need to start looking at LiDAR, ground penetration radar? Are we going to start gas monitoring, echo sound? What are we trying to achieve? And also, what are we trying to achieve now to get that initial return on investment for the program? And then where are we going to try and go further down the route? So down the road. So if we're looking at certain platforms now that achieve everything that we need right now, but they cost a lot of money, are they going to be restrictive as the program develops? That's a massive consideration about the roadmap of where you're going to go. Software, we're looking at flight planning, checklists, weather, airspace approval, so LANCE, UAS and pilot logs, battery logs, mission planning. Mission planning and flight planning, two very different things. How do you plan to make sure that it's safe to operate in the airspace? Where you're going to operate is flight planning. Mission planning, if you're doing autonomous or automated flights, you need to capture specific areas. A completely different part of the software world. Data capture and then data analytics, and we can take forward into storage, etc. So what are the systems you need to do? And also, this is going to feed back into budget. Again, it's going to feed back into training. Where are you now? Where do you want to be in a year's time? Where do you want to be in 3 years' time, etc. So as you expand, as you incorporate more equipment, it's going to cost more money. And how are you going to manage that? And then we start talking about peripherals. So your displays. Are you going to use the standard display that comes with the equipment? Do you need dual displays? Do you need to have a way of showing your site engineers or the data that's being captured in real time? Do you need to feed it back to somewhere? How are you going to charge your batteries in the field? How are you going to transport your batteries? We have this issue with one of our platforms in the UK and the US at the moment. The batteries can only be transported by ground, which is great. But then when we start talking about the emergency deployment side of the business, that ties us massively in terms of how we incorporate that particular platform. What safety equipment are we going to need? Are we going to need to transport fire extinguishers? Do we need first aid kits? Do we need a windsock? What various equipment do we need? That PPE, storage, so cases. How are we going to transport the equipment so it doesn't get damaged? And then diagnostic equipment. Do we need to take anything with us if something goes wrong in the field? How are we going to be able to work out what's going on with our equipment? And then we start talking to maintenance, spare parts, propellers, consumables, more batteries, software updates, firmware updates, all that type of thing. Once we understand this, we can then start talking about training, and we can develop the training methodology for the equipment, the specific equipment, and we can start building a training program that reflects that. And then we need to start talking about other technology. And there's two sort of ways of looking at this. Is the UAS the right equipment? Should we, do we need to use something where anything unmanned might not be the right equipment? And don't be afraid to sit here and go, actually, for the use case that someone's come up with, the process we've got in place is the process we should be using, and we shouldn't need to be replacing it with this new shiny thing. I'm done on equipment, Brian.
Great. Moving on to the next one. Training.
So, yeah, training, and there's an awesome photograph of me that's been blurred out. So there you go. Shows that I still do it though. So initial and ongoing training not only reduces the risk of an incident, but it improves the quality of the data, the efficiency of our operations, and the expansion of our program. But we've got some real key considerations. How are we going to implement our training program? Let's just step back for one moment and we talk about most of the programs that we've worked with people for at a corporate level. They've already got some form of drone operation, some on one or two of their sites. So some people have gone and used out of their own budget, gone and bought some drones, and they've been using them. So they already think they have a drone program, but it's just a site-specific one. So how are you going to implement this corporate level program, which incorporates training and training requirements, and how are you going to incorporate that for people that are already deemed in their own mind as qualified or competent operators? And that's going to be something that has to be managed, has to be corporate led. So first thing is, how are we going to implement this? How do we select our operators? So as I just said, you may already have some, but how are you going to select new operators? Where are they going to come from? Are they going to be all internal? Are they going to be new recruitment? Are they going to be, as Brian alluded to earlier, someone's third or fourth role within their job? How are you going to manage that? Then we need to look at the training standards we're going to set. So what do we need to be able to operate our drones safely, legally, efficiently, get a maximum return of investment? There's going to have to be a standard level, and generally, certainly across most people, Part 107 is deemed as the sort of very low barrier of entry, especially when you compare against other global training standards. And most corporate organizations don't accept Part 107 as brilliant, you've got your ticket, you can go and fly. They require other levels of training. So what is that going to be? And then once you've got that training standard, how do you set some form of recurrency? So what we mean by recurrency is, we know that Part 107 needs to be renewed every 2 years. But what about everything else? What about making sure that you're up to speed? What about if you've not been able to do your role for 3 months, 6 months? Are you okay to go and pick up your controller, charge your batteries and go and fly? Or does at a corporate level, are you going to need to have some form of reassessment to make sure that you are still safe, you're still current, and you can still operate that drone properly? We need to support our UAS operators to train regularly. We do it internally, with myself included, but with my team. How do we allow them to go out on a monthly basis to make sure they train, to test that new equipment, to test a new manager way of capturing data, but also to just maintain their competency at a core level as well? How do we manage that one? How much time is required for it? How much time do we need to give them from their role? So if I put from myself and my team's point of view, how much time do I take away from their core responsibilities for them and myself to go and train? And then who pays for it? It's going to come out of a budget. So, and that's not only is that the time it's taking for the individuals to go and do that, wherever they may need to go and do it, who's going to train them? Are you going to manage that as an internal program? Are you going to incorporate a company like Consortiq, employ a company like Consortiq to deliver that training? Are you going to employ us to to do currency training and just come in and do spot checks, as some of our clients do? Where's that budget going to come from? But the key point here, without a mandatory training policy as part of your operations manual, as part of your procedures, including recurrency, training will not happen. People's time will be put onto different things. People will be deployed to go and do the first part of their job or the second part of their job, not necessarily worried so much about the third part. So it needs to be a mandatory training policy. It needs to be an operations procedure, an operations manual. It needs to be corporate led, incorporating health and safety to enforce and to make sure that happens.
And ultimately reinforced by leadership. It gets back to it. If leadership doesn't toe the line and enforce the mandatory training policy, then everybody else isn't going to fall in line. And I'll tell you, there is huge disparity that I've seen between ops and sales, that a lot of people don't understand why, folks are going out and flying because it looks like they're just going out for fun if they're not actually going out and completing a mission in support of the company. Well, again, that the training has to happen, and the leadership needs to support that. It's critical. or else you'll have, you know, ascension within the ranks, if you will. So there you go, Bryce.
So internal systems, slightly strange title, but most organizations, as we say here, will be implementing their UAS program into an established business. So that established business will have processes and procedures across multiple departments. So when we're talking about internal systems, it's how do we implement something new, and it could be, doesn't have to be unmanned air vehicles, it could be anything, but how do we incorporate something new into an established process? And we mentioned this earlier, but we need to talk about the IT infrastructure. For example, managing that captured data. The IT policy, so assessing external software. So if we're talking about point cloud, how do we access that? Again, what do we need to do in terms of that? Is there confidential data that we need to manage? Where, you know, how do we manage that so that we're in control of it? Downloading firmware. Most UAS require firmware updates. The manufacturers will deploy firmware releases. How do we stop that happening before we're confident that that firmware is ready to be used, and then how do we then get that firmware onto our platform so that they can be updated, and then how do we share our systems access to our systems with our contractors? So we may not operate all of our unmanned air vehicle program internally. We may have contractors coming in, like Consortiq does with our UDS service. We may do those inspections for you, may do that data capture for you for certain areas. So how do we incorporate that so that the contractor can upload their data that they've captured into your system? Then you're going to have internal policies and procedures. And you need to make sure that the elements of the drone program don't cause conflict. So if you set a PPE requirement for your drone program, for example, does it conflict with the policies and the procedures for some sites? How do you manage that one from a health and safety point of view? Just making sure that, you know, for example, some sites I've been to require you to wear pretty heavy helmet. When you're standing there watching a drone for several hours a day in the sky, so you're keeping visual line of sight of that, and you've got particularly, you know, some of these heavy safety helmets, that can get quite tiring after a while. It can give you neck ache, give you back pain. So do you need to have a different type of helmet to be able to use within that role? If you do, does the helmets that you choose, do they still meet the policies and procedures of the organisation? Site management and supporting the UAS scene, we've talked about this previously, but it's really, really important. And I've seen this on numerous sites where either sites will decide to go and do their own thing outside of the corporate program, or they will not allow the UAS team to operate the way that the policy needs to be, the policies and procedures and the systems require. And then we start talking about purchasing procedures. So how do you go? Yeah, how do you manage the purchasing that ties in with your internal systems within the organisation, so that spare parts can be replaced, consumables can be purchased. If the worst happens and the drone becomes unserviceable, how can you replace it? Have that in place, have that procedure in place and ready to go. A lot of large organisations have some training standards. They have training procedures already in place. They may have a certain way that training is delivered. And you need to make sure that if you're designing your training package internally, you tie it in and meet that requirement. But also, if you're using a contractor, that contractor recognises the requirements of your own training standards and policies. And then the last one we're going to talk about is equipment policies. A lot is said about where our drones come from, where they're manufactured, whether there's a risk to them, to our data. And your company may have a policy in place that doesn't allow UAS from certain countries. So how can you make sure that when we go back to our use case, you are going to be able to get that deliverable within your budget that also meets your internal systems, policies and procedures?
Excellent. Thanks, Bryce. We'll move on here. Quick review.
Okay, so by review, rather than reviewing what we've just been through, what we mean is a way that your program can be constantly reviewed and updated. We do this internally as an organization with our teams. So we start at the beginning of the program, the formative period, as we put here, of your US program. we're going to need regular reviews because we'll find that something we've written in the training program doesn't tie in with an element, and you want to make sure that your operations procedures or your training program actually does meet everything within the organization. When there is an issue, how can it be managed? Rather than just deleting it or just saying, well, this is actually the way we're going to do it, is there a compromise? Is there something that needs to be amended? And then once it's established, by that I mean once the drone program's established, what can we incorporate, or we need to incorporate the following to maximize our benefits to the organization. So regular program reviews. Certainly within the first year, we'd be looking at quarterly to 6 monthly reviews, and then moving on to annual reviews of the program. Some way for operator feedback. So the operators, the drone pilots, for want of a better word, can feed back into the team without fear of a recrimination if they have a concern, if they're not comfortable with the way something's done, or if they've picked up something that might be of benefit. How can they feed that back into the organization? And then we talk about just culture for learning. As you can see by the images here, things go wrong. What happens, when something goes wrong? How do you manage it? How do you make sure that training or the training can be learned from when things do go wrong? Our ability to modify our processes and procedures as are required. We need to react to regulation changes, and believe me, from the UK, that's almost like a weekly occurrence with the Civil Aviation Authority in EASA at the moment. We are constantly having to change it. New releases are put out. It's nice when there's a month when we don't get an update. And then we need to look at our training requirements. We need to review our training requirements, and we need to consider new equipment. So just because our training's been built on using 3 platforms from one manufacturer, if our use cases or new equipment means we need to get a drone from a different manufacturer, or tablet or whatever it might be, from a new manufacturer, how do we incorporate that into our training program? And then we need to feed this back into the roadmap, because the roadmap will be going on one direction and it will have been designed a long time ago potentially. How do we feed everything that we reviewed back into that roadmap so that we can go back on track with adjustments?
And adopting the mentality of, well, that's always the way we've done it, the wrong way to go. This technology, this market, things are moving so quickly, you've got to keep up and be able to adapt and overcome to make sure that you're providing the maximum value to your organization, company, and clients. Okay, so quickly, in interest of time here and getting some questions, wouldn't be a brief. We didn't do a little plug for Consortiq, but essentially, this is our capabilities that we're able to do. Everything that kind of Bryce laid out in his brief with those 6 pillars is what we do for our clients, and it includes all of those services and everything that you see here. We've really evolved quite a bit since we've established our 2nd hub in the United States just over 4 years ago, but really gaining a lot of traction with many clients globally, not only in the UK and the US, but we've done work down in the South America, Central America, busting into Africa, now definitely the Middle East. So yeah, we would definitely love to talk to you. If you've got questions, we can easily be reached. And I'm gonna hand it back over to Bryce real quick.
Thanks, Brian. So I just want to leave this with something to bear in mind. I worked with a client in the oil and gas sector several years ago now, and he was trying to run a UAS program, taken on from someone else, and was trying to do the best he possibly could. His fear within the organisation was if we, and by we mean the people that the organisation wanted to operate the drones, which were the engineers on that side. If we make them follow a process, they won't use the technology and it will fail. And actually, that was the way he wanted to be. That was that we're not going to make them do this. We're not going to make them follow some policy and procedures. We're going to let them use the drones. They're going to fly and do things the way they want to do. He bowed down to the operators so much, and that program was doomed. There was no way of pulling that out under effectively his leadership. That was where it went. And that was where it went. It doesn't need to be complicated. We don't need to make these programs really difficult, but we do need to make them so that they are manageable. And in the eyes of the FAA, they are aircraft. There are rules. They're pretty simple in the US, but if operators don't want to comply, don't make them operators. Don't risk it going wrong.
So I'll leave it up for questions right now. Hopefully you've been sending them this entire brief. And if not, this is where we can be reached. You can reach me at Bryan, Bryan, at Consortiq.com, or reach out on our info or give us a call. We'd be happy to speak to you.